To finish, I'm going to go through a worked example from scratch, which will end up being an actual Bach chorale, a chorale harmonized by Bach. And the chorale is from Cantata BWV 5, and I'll reveal in advance that it's 304 from the Riemenschneider edition, and the tune is Auf meinen lieben Gott, in my dear God, brackets I trust, and it sounds like this. The tune is in common time with an upbeat and then therefore 3 beats in the last bar, and it's in a minor key. My other main example was in a major key. It's in G minor. And what shall we do? Step 1 is what you most likely do already if you're harmonizing chorales, which is to plan the overall key and cadence structure. Ideally, we want to modulate to at least one other closely related key. And in this case, it's looking as if we're going to modulate into B flat major, the relative major, because I don't see any C sharps suggesting D minor, or E naturals also suggesting D minor, or B naturals suggesting C minor. And what I do see is lots of Ds and B flats and a climactic F note, which is the dominant note in B flat major. So I have a hunch that we're going to modulate into the relative major. And to work out the overall structure, it is convenient to look at the first and last notes of each phrase and work out what could be cadences for the ends of the phrases, even though it's not obligatory for every phrase to end with a proper cadence. What's most certain is that the chorale will end in G minor with an authentic cadence, aka perfect cadence, going 5-1 in G minor. So here's my 1. And the dominant chord could appear on the downbeat, or it could appear on the second beat after a chord 2, because the note A is also in chord 2. Alternatively, it could be that this C indicates a predominant chord, chord 2 or chord 4, so we'll just decide later about that. But for the other phrases, there's at least a couple of decent options for the ending. Because the first phrase could end with a half cadence, aka imperfect cadence, in G minor, but it could also modulate straight away into B flat and end on chord 1 of B flat, because D would be the third of that chord. This could be a half cadence in G minor, because A is the fifth of chord 5, but it could also be a half cadence in B flat, because A is the leading note in B flat. Then here, well, it's the same notes as here, so this could also be a half cadence in G minor, or again, it could be a cadence in B flat, with supertonic dominant tonic in B flat. And that's true of this as well, because B flat's the third of G minor, so it could be a tonic cadence, or it's the tonic of B flat major. This is probably going to be a half cadence in B flat, ending on the chord F, but it could be that we modulate into C minor. Here we go. I'm going to stay in G minor, up to here actually, and then I'm going to modulate to B flat, stay in B flat all the way along here, go back to G minor. That's my plan. And the first phrase is going to end on chord 5, root position of G minor, which makes it a half cadence or imperfect cadence. And I'm going to use contrary motion, so I'm going to pop in an E flat here, a sixth to an octave. And that means that I know this chord is 4, C minor, and it's in first inversion, which is what we call a Phrygian cadence, when you go down a semitone to the dominant, so this is predominant, dominant, and then I'm going to have tonic here, but I have to make my mind up whether it's going to be root position or first inversion. So that's the first phrase. Second phrase ends with the notes C and A, and I'm going to do another half cadence. So this is going to be the same bass note, There's no rule that you have to do a different bass note each time. And this will not be dull because the soprano note is different. I'm again going to use contrary motion. So the bass goes up, octave, perfect fifth. And so this chord could be 4 or 2, and we'll find out later which is more convenient. In phrase number 3, I'm going to modulate into B flat. So I'm going to write B flat. I'm going to modulate here somewhere, somehow. And then I'm going to end, however, with a surprise. A sneaky surprise. Because I'm going to go like this. Chord 2, first inversion. Chord 5. And then everyone will expect chord 1, which would be the bass going predominant, dominant, tonic. But instead I'm going to throw in a surprise. I'm going to come back to the surprise. And then here, in this bar, I'm going to do the cadence that everybody was expecting here, which is 2, first inversion, 5, 1. So I'm firmly in B flat here. And the twist here is not chord 6, because that would give me parallel fifths. If I put a G here, parallel fifths with the tune, so I can't do that. The twist is a bigger surprise than chord 6 would be, which is an F sharp in the bass. What explains the F sharp? Well, it's chord 5 of G minor. Does this mean that I'm modulating back into G minor? It could do, but it doesn't in this case. What it does mean is that I'm tonicizing the chord G minor, which is chord 6. Chord 6 in B flat is coming up, and this is chord 5 of 6. 5 of 6. And it's in first inversion. But then I'm going to resume in B flat major here. Okay, then I'm still in B flat, and then here I'm going to do a half cadence in B flat. So I'm ending on chord 5 in B flat, which is an F chord. And before chord 5, I'm going to use a predominant, which could be C minor, that would be chord 2, but I'm going to use 5 of 5, also in first inversion. So 5, first inversion of 5. And this semitone will have a very nice strong effect because E natural will be perceived as the leading note in relation to F, so it resolves up. And then since this is predominant, dominant, I'm going to go tonic in B flat, which is B flat. So that's 1. And then here I'm going to modulate back into G minor in time for the last cadence. But I may as well come up with a provisional final cadence. So what I'm going to do is to go chord 4, 5, 1. I'm going to decorate this note later, that's why that's in pencil. And in order to liven up this minim a bit, I'm going to do a suspension in the alto, which is going to be prepared here. Preparation, suspension, leading note. And then the leading note will drop so that I have a complete chord here. And the tenor will end on the third, which will be major, so it's a Picardy third. And the tenor will double the root of chord 5. And I need the third of chord 4, so the tenor must do an E flat. So this is a 4-3 suspension. Okay, so I've got this outline with lots of gaps now, and it sounds like this. Now then, I want to fill in the rest of the bass line and work out what all the chords are. First chord's going to be 1. Doesn't have to be, but it will be in this case. and what happens in between. What I'm looking for is 1. Optimal counterpoint between the tune and the bass. That 2 gives me the right progressions because of the scale degrees that are used at each of these points. Let's just remind ourselves, what are those normal progressions? Mostly they're going to be of the predominant dominant tonic variety, like this, predominant dominant tonic, or the passing chord variety, which we haven't got yet, or maybe the plagal variety, like 1-4-1, or maybe the sequential variety if the tune is sequential, or maybe one or two other things, such as the subdividing Mission Impossible progression, which don't call it that. Because tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic is so important, let's just go through that again. The tonic is chord 1. Then you can, if you want, use one or more, normally 1 or 2 predominants. They would normally be in this order: 6, then down a third to 4, down a third to 2, which is the most frequent and is normally in first inversion, unless it's a 7th chord, in which case it could also be root position or third inversion. Then sometimes right before the dominant chord, there's 5 of 5, dominant of the dominant, or leading note of the dominant, which would either be a first inversion leading note triad or a 7th chord. Then there's the dominant, which is 5, but as a substitute, you can sometimes get chord 7, which again would be either a first inversion diminished triad or a 7th chord. And then you go back to tonic or surprise of various kinds, most commonly 6. And you don't have to use predominance, but it helps. You can just go tonic, dominant, tonic, or tonic, leading note, tonic, where this would often be a passing chord. So I'm writing a chorale in G minor, so the chords are going to be G minor, and so this should really be lowercase, but this is just the model. Then E flat is chord 6, chord 4 is C minor, chord 2 is A diminished, or A half diminished 7th. 5 of 5 is going to be A, or normally A7. Leading note chord of the dominant, dominant being D, is C sharp diminished, or sometimes C sharp diminished 7th. Then the dominant is D, and that's often 7th as well. And if we use the leading note chord, it's F sharp diminished. This means diminished. The applied chord would go before the dominant chord rather than before 7 normally. And then back to G minor, or a surprise. And if we're in B flat major, then the tonic is B flat, chord 6 is G minor, chord 4 is E flat, chord 2 is C minor, 5 of 5 is C7, leading note of 5 is E diminished, maybe 7th, chord 5 is F, maybe 7, and the leading note chord is A diminished. This is worth sketching out for whatever key your chorale is in, and we can see straight away that there are some pivot chords that could be useful, like G minor. Because if we're in G minor, we can modulate into B flat any moment by going G minor, F, B flat, because G minor is a predominant. Or we could do the same thing with E flat or C minor or A diminished, for example. Not quite the same as F, you see, because let's say A diminished is a leading note chord. We could use that as a passing chord and then suddenly treat it as a predominant in G minor, or vice versa. And this is why frequently the pivot chords are going to be predominants. Anyway, back to our chorale. As I was saying, what we want now is the ideal counterpoint that produces chords in the right order. There'll be several ways of doing this, but let's use the principle of asking ourselves whether we can go in contrary or oblique motion. And we can. For example, we could do this. We could skip up in the bass to B flat, and then come down again, and then throw in a passing note. There's what we call voice exchange. Soprano goes G, B flat, bass goes B flat G, so they swap. And what would the chords be? Well, we already know this is 4 first inversion, 5 Phrygian cadence, that's 1. And here we'd use the rule of the octave formula, which is this is 1. This is 1 first inversion, and this is also a 6th chord. And therefore it's a leading note 6th chord. So it's F sharp diminished. And the inner parts would go like this. Maybe a passing note on the way up, probably. Then complete chord 5 with 2 roots. Shortest way here. And the tenor would either go up to E flat and then jump down to A, or go down to a G and then go up again. And this would be good. The bass skips up a third and then there's contrary motion. So that would be perfectly fine. What Bach actually does is to skip up a fourth instead of a third to a C. C plus G, we can deduce that's chord 4. It can't be a half diminished 7th because the G doesn't resolve down. And then he descends in first oblique and then contrary motion. So here's chord 1. So we've got tonic, subdominant, tonic again, and then predominant, dominant, tonic. And here, this could be chord 7. You could just go up E natural F sharp G. But what Bach does is a bit more colourful. He starts with G minor, then C minor, and then chord 2, minor chord 2, with a raised 6th degree, and then the 6th degree goes up. It's raised because it goes up to the leading note, which means that this is a chord 7, first inversion, and then 1. So this is the substitute dominant. And you get this all the time in chorales, and it looks as if that's just a passing note. So you might just label it as chord 2 and then chord 1. But that doesn't really make sense because chord 2 doesn't normally just go to chord 1. So we've got predominant, predominant, dominant substitute, tonic. And then we fill in here using the law of the shortest way. Bach goes up to an E flat in the tenor and then jumps down a diminished 5th, which means you can expect it most likely to change direction and have a B flat here. So that's our first phrase. Next, still in G minor, can I still kill time in G minor or prolong G minor using contrary motion? Well, maybe. What I can't do is go down to G in the bass and then go G, A, B flat, C, because I'd get parallel octaves. So that doesn't work. What I could do is go down to a B flat, which would give me chord 1, first inversion, and then go up to an E flat here. This would be pretty good, because then I can interpret this as 2, 5, 7, where the C becomes the 7th of 5, 7, and then 6, followed by either 2 or 4. So this would be tonic, predominant, dominant, surprise, predominant, dominant. There are 3 perfect intervals in a row, but they're all approached in contrary motion. And you would do something like this. Complete 7th chord, because it's inverted. And then here you'd want, there's the A. This is an A minor chord, so I go E natural. And here's the F sharp. And perhaps throw in a consonant skip. Da-dee-dee-dee-dee. Tenor has to go down. Can't go back up to B flat. That would be parallel 5ths. And then you do something like this, thus ending with a doubled root. So you could do this if you want contrary motion like this. And that would be good. But what Bach does is also good, as you'd expect. He just keeps going down the scale in parallel tenths. So he's got a complete scale from middle C down to G. This is still chord 5, but it's now chord 5-7, which we would call 4-2. That means third inversion, 7th chord. And this is chord 1. And this is just a passing chord, so it's the rule of the octave. It's a first inversion chord. That means A is the third, and the root is F sharp. So it's leading note. D, F sharp, A, C, complete 7th chord. Leading note goes up, tenor goes up, doubling the third so that you resolve this dissonant leap, and also so that you move by step upwards, because the tenor now goes up to the C. Here's an octave approached in contrary motion. And then here's the F sharp, and quite often you throw in a suspension. And then tenor has to go up, because otherwise it's parallel octaves. Alto goes up. Here's an octave G, contrary motion. And then let's go for chord 2, first inversion, D major chord. Phrase number 3. Now, so far I've just been killing time in G minor by going predominant, dominant, tonic whenever I can. But now my priority is to modulate into B flat. How can I do that? What's the least obscure way? Well, I already mentioned it. It's to reinterpret the chord G minor as a predominant in B flat and just go 6-5-1. So the question is, can I go 6-5-1 straight away? And preferably, can I do that in contrary motion? And it turns out, yes, I can, because after I just repeat this chord, I can go G minor. Chord 1 in G minor equals chord 6 in B flat. And then I can go 5-1, because C is a note in 5 and D is a note in 1. So I go F, contrary motion. And I could skip down to B flat, but I'm going to go through the third. So this is actually going to be first inversion and then root position. And the alto goes up, so does the tenor, and I add passing notes in the bass, making sure that I don't accidentally create parallels. And so this is actually entirely conjunct from here up to here. But I know you're shouting at the screen now, because surely Bach has created a dominant 7th chord by throwing in this E flat. But the 7th doesn't resolve down. And to make matters worse, he's doubled the 7th on the offbeat. And I think for A-level purposes, we can probably knock a mark off, ironically. And you should instead skip up to an F in the tenor, so that there's no 7th that resolves the wrong way. But wearing my Bach wig, I reckon that he would just say that this is a passing note. And so is this one. And they're going in different directions. Or maybe, who knows, maybe it's a once-in-a-lifetime second inversion leading note passing chord. Something like that. Anyway, life goes on. Let's move on. So in the next chord, we've got the supertonic C minor. And it turns out that we can make this into a 7th chord, 2-7-B, because the B flat is right here, just crying out to prepare a suspension. So here's the 7th, and this must resolve by step to the leading note in B flat. Inverted 7th chords should be complete, so the tenor goes up to the note G, which is the 5th. And then we want our dominant chord to have a doubled root, so the tenor goes down to the root of F. Next chord is a D chord, so we want an A, and the A is already there in the alto, so we just continue. And there isn't really a good way of including the seventh here, so we just go down to double the root in the tenor. And why don't we throw in a passing note? And since we're doing that, why don't we have a neighbor note in the alto so that it is in parallel thirds with the tenor? And the result is this. I'm sure you agree, we just about get away with this seventh because of the conjunct motion and the contrary motion with the bass. Right, moving on. Phrase number 4. As I mentioned, my plan, which is really Bach's plan, of staying in B flat. So it sounds as if we're going into G minor, but that's just a red herring because it will turn out that G minor is just a predominant in B flat. And the tune is the same as in bar 5. So I already know that I can go 6-5-1 in contrary motion, but I don't want to be too repetitive. So what's the nearest thing to that? Well, it would be perhaps to go 6-5-1 not in contrary motion. So what I'll do is to go up instead of down in the bass. So chord 5 is in first inversion. So I'm really taking the alto part from here and popping it in the bass line. Bach complicates matters by changing the spacing of the D major chord. The bass skips down, so it's a change of position like this one, from first inversion to root position, and that means the leading note F sharp has to pop into a different voice, so it's in the alto, and then the tenor moves down as well. So this is a fifth approached in similar motion. A little bit unusual, but it's in between phrases. And this means that the tenor can't go back up to the note D because that would be definitely parallel fifths. So the tenor goes up to the note B flat. That means that in order to have a complete chord, the alto skips down to the note D. And this is a little bit curious because normally the F sharp should resolve straight up, but the F sharp is going to resolve up after a delay. We'll say it's a delay. Or it's postponed. That's another good one. And once you have this spacing of a chord, it starts to get a bit tricky because the tenor can't go up to the note C because that would be parallel octaves. And the tenor also can't double the leading note because we don't like to double the leading note. So the tenor will skip up to an F. The alto doesn't really want to skip up to the same note as the tenor because when we approach a unison in similar motion, one of the parts will normally step to it. So what happens here is that Bach crosses parts. The alto crosses below the tenor. So this is an octave approached in contrary motion. And then the alto skips back over the tenor as soon as possible, which is here. And so as to distinguish the parts, so it's clear which is which, the tenor moves in the meantime with a passing note down to the third. So it's G minor, F, B flat with crossing inner parts. And the important thing is that we haven't approached any perfect consonances in parallel. Okay, that's all fine. 6, 5, 1, 2, 5, 1. So we could just repeat this chord, but maybe that would be a bit dull. So let's think, is there a chord that could go between 1 and 2, which includes the mediant note? Yes. It's chord 6 in B flat, which is G minor. So we pop in a G here. That's chord 6. So we have 2 predominants. And the most conjunct voice leading is for the alto to go up. And we want the G anyway, because here's an F sharp. And that means the tenor must descend to fill in the third. And that sounds good anyway, because you can do another passing note and have a little scale. And you can do the same thing in the bass. And then here you can just flip the alto and tenor voices because now the tenor is conveniently preparing the seventh of chord 2, 7, and the alto is already on the note G. The seventh must resolve down, so that's the leading note in the tenor, and the alto moves down so that you double the root. And then here, either the alto stays on F and the tenor skips up to the third, D, or what's more common is that the leading note skips down and everyone descends for a cadence. All parts descend, but 2 of them descend by step and 1 by a third, so it's not too lurching in effect. Okay, good, that's our 4th phrase. Now we're still in B flat, and I'm not really modulating because this is just an applied chord. So I'm trying to kill time or prolong B flat harmony. And the notes I've got to play with are 4 Ds and an F. So I could just go B flat, B flat, B flat, B flat, B flat, C7, F, but that would be a bit dull. So I have to work out how to use some other chords to liven it up. I can't use chord 2 because it doesn't include either of these notes. I can't use chord 4. So what could go between 1, let's assume this is 1, and 5 of 5? Answer is chord 6 again. 1, 6, 5 of 5, 5, 1. So I could put chord 6 here, or here, or here. I'm going to put it at the last moment. 6, 5 of 5, 5, 1. And I'm going to start on chord 1, and I'm going to leap up in the bass so that I can head downwards dramatically. And the tenor will also leap up, so there's a unison. 2 parts leap up to the same note, but it's from the end of one phrase to the beginning of another, so it's not too bad. They both leap consonantly. It's an octave leap and a perfect 4th leap. So the alto has to also go up so that I have a complete chord. So this sounds like a fresh start because everybody skips up a little bit. And what to do next? Well, what could I do with the notes F and D? Well, I could just repeat B flat, but that's a bit boring, as we said. So what's the least obscure thing I could do? It's to go 1, 5, 1. Because remember, you don't need predominance every time you use a dominant. So I'm going to go 1, 5, 1. Can I do that in contrary motion and preferably with some conjunct motion? Yes. Because the bass can go down to A, the leading note, and back up again, which is what we call a neighbouring chord. And the tenor will go up, can't double the leading note, can't go in parallel unisons especially, and the alto will stay the same. So I have a slightly unusual spacing here because there's an octave between the soprano down to the alto, which is the maximum we want, but it's okay once in a while, especially because this is the high point of the tune, so the soprano is coming down again. Tenor continues up, doubling the third. So you can see that Bach doubles the third constantly. Another F here. And what could go here? I could repeat B flat. Pause the video. What could go here? Well, congratulations if you thought you can use an applied chord. The dominant of 6, which is D. The same as my surprise chord from here. And I can do that because it's the same note, D, in the tune, which is the root of 5 of 6. So this one resolves here like this. So I've got 3 applied chords so far. So I go tonic, dominant, tonic, predominant with its applied chord, another predominant, dominant, tonic. And shortest way is tenor stays the same, alto moves up to the note A, pop in a passing note, and then here you could do it either way. The tenor could stay on the note D and the alto could go up to B flat, or what Bach does is for the tenor to come down to B flat and the alto to also come down. And this means that I can yet again use a 7th chord. So this is 5-7 of 5, and here's the 7th because the tenor prepares it in exactly the same way as here, and the alto does the same thing as here. This note's going to resolve to A here, and the root will be doubled in the alto. And then just to liven this up and animate it rhythmically a bit, Bach changes position again, as he did here and here, in between, so it becomes root position for a moment. And that means that the E natural has to appear in one of the inner parts, so it appears in the alto. but it doesn't appear straight away. What he does is to have neighbor notes back up and then pops the E natural in the alto. There's also a passing note here. So we've got our fifth phrase. You see how much nicer chorale is for using some applied chords. Okay, and then our final phrase. We've already worked out the ending, roughly. And here the priority is to modulate back to G minor. So in order to decide what happens here, I'm thinking, what's the pivot chord to get back to G minor? And can I do something contrary in the bass as well? This one is perhaps a tiny bit more convoluted, so I'm going to pencil it in. Let's imagine we were still in B flat and we just wanted to stay in B flat. Option 1 would be to go up the rule of the octave in contrary motion with the tune. The supertonic note is the third of a leading note chord, first inversion, A diminished, and you'd expect this voice leading, which we discussed earlier in part 4, which is that the inner parts go by step and you have unequal fifths. These are not parallel fifths because A to E flat is a diminished fifth. So this is a leading note chord going back to chord 1. And as I mentioned earlier, the leading note chord in B flat is also a predominant in G minor. So we can just reinterpret this chord as 2 in G minor and do what I sketched earlier, which is to then make it an E natural and go up via the leading note so that it's called 5-7. So I forget this chord because I'm not staying in B flat after all. And the bass will still move up to the note D, but it'll do so here so that it's a 5-7. Can you see the problem now? Problem now is that this is no longer unequal fifths because I had to make the E natural in order to go up the melodic minor scale. So I can't do an F in the alto. So the alto is going to go down to a D, and there's going to be a passing note here. And who knows, some people might knock another mark off for omitting the fifth, but let's not do so. And also, you may notice that this is a bit sneaky because my leading note chord was an A diminished chord, but it's no longer diminished. So you could say, is that really a pivot chord? Because A minor doesn't really occur in B flat. But that turns out not to matter. It's just chromatically adjusted, and the voice leading is the same as it would be in the rule of the octave pattern I just showed you. So it's going to sound good. It's going to sound a little bit spicy and extra nice because it's an E natural instead of an E flat. Okay, and then what we could do would be to do chord 1. The only trouble here is that we wouldn't be able to do a fifth without doing contrary fifths, which are still consecutive fifths. But perhaps what's even nicer is to do predominant, dominant, surprise. So we have 6, 4, 5, 1. And then what Bach does is, just to keep you interested, he pops in an accented passing note for the first time in the bass and divides up this leap of a sixth by bringing the tenor up a broken chord. And he also decorates the tenor at the end with a seventh, so that you throw in a seventh here, and decorates that further with a neighbor note, B flat. And so now our last phrase goes. So you can see how this process is a bit like a figurative artist doing an oil portrait or something like that, starting with the general outline and gradually filling in all the detail. And the overall chorale now sounds like this. And there you have it, how to do a chorale by Bach. Hope this helps you with your 4-part harmony. Thank you very much for watching, and please look out for other videos in the future